Yeah, yeah. Yep. That's good.
Rules Committee, come to order, and thank you very much for joining us today after a week where members were back home for the 4th of July work period. Today, the Rules Committee will consider H.R. 3281, the Reclamation, Title Transfer, and Non-Federal Infrastructure Incentive Act, and H.R. 50, the Unfunded Mandates and Information Transparency Act of 2017. H.R. 3281, which we will discuss first with the distinguished gentleman who is from Colorado, seeks to reduce administrative paperwork, eliminate federal taxpayer liability, and empower water users by streamlining the process governing the transfer of some U.S. Bureau of Reclamation projects to non-federal interest. Modernizing the BOR transfer process will afford water users and greater control over their water and water-related facilities, while reducing liability for the American taxpayer. It's a most interesting process, one that would be very much like, if you're involved in it, of making sausage, and that's why our distinguished first panel will get into this most important detailed work of the United States Congress. H.R. 50, which we'll discuss second, closes loopholes in the Unfunded Mandates Reform Act and augments existing analysis requirements to improve the quality of regulations and identify unduly burdensome or harmful federal regulations and mandates. H.R. 50 will increase collaboration between state, federal, local, and tribal governments, most importantly, with the private sector, which will help alleviate harmful federal mandates. This will consequently benefit consumers and citizens by bolstering the economy through reforming the regulatory process and closing detrimental loopholes. It's a most interesting discussion and debate that will take place today, and our two panels will be right in line to do that. Before we move to our first panel with the distinguished young gentleman from Colorado Springs, we've yielded time for the purpose of anything the gentleman would like to discuss related to this. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and happy to be back, and it's great to see you. But here we are, barely 6 months after the passage of the Republicans' tax bill to help the wealthy, and the majority is back with another giveaway to corporate America. H.R. 50, which we're going to be considering, would allow a regulated industry the chance to influence the rulemaking process before other stakeholders. So big agribusinesses could have the chance to influence food safety rules before health experts can weigh in. And big oil could influence a regulation on oil drilling before environmental groups even get in the room. So I don't know why my friends are trying to tip the scales of the rulemaking process toward powerful private interests, but this must have been the next thing on corporate America's wish list. But I guess the question is, when is enough enough? The second measure here is H.R. 3281. It brings part of the President's disastrous infrastructure bill back from the dead. It amounts to a de facto privatization of federal water infrastructure across the western United States. The Secretary of Interior could literally give away ownership of dams, canals, or hydroelectric power plants. There's no requirement that taxpayers even be compensated. Businesses get the benefits, they get the windfall, and the public gets left behind. So this isn't about cutting red tape. You're cutting Congress out of its longstanding oversight responsibility over federal water projects. It's dangerous, and that's why leading environmental groups are against the bill. I seek unanimous consent to insert into the record.
Without objection, will be in the record.
Be a letter from more than a dozen groups, including the Sierra Club and the League of Conservation Voters. They outline how this bill undermines environmental protections. It also creates a loophole in the National Environmental Policy Act that would, quote, increase the likelihood of harmful title transfers that are not in the public interest, end of quote. Now notice the trend here. With the majority, corporate interests always come before the public interest. Instead of focusing on what we can give away to businesses, we should be focusing on what needs to be brought back together, families. Today is the court-ordered deadline for the Trump administration to reunite more than 100 children under 5 years old separated from their parents at the border. It's a deadline the administration sadly is going to miss. Dozens of families will still be torn apart. So, Mr. Chairman, why aren't we here today doing something about that? The federal government, under the President's direction, created this problem. We should be dealing with this crisis, not focusing on giving away federal government assets. I thank you for giving me the time. I yield back.
Yes, sir, and thank you very much. You know, we're in the middle right now of trying to make sure that we not only address issues, as everybody knows, this committee is here to make sure that we would bolster and aid our economy. We have the largest number of people that are ever working in America. We have the lowest amount of unemployed people in the 47 years that the ability that we've had to look at unemployment is being measured right now. And just a stock market that is going crazy for a job site, looking for employees all over the country. It's an amazing turnaround. That happens because of rules and regulations, taxes, and I just don't hear about companies moving overseas anymore. I hear about them moving back some $50 billion worth. And that's part of
Harley Davidson?
you know, it won't be because of the tax code.
Oh, the tariffs and the...
Won't be because of the tax code. So what we'll do is, and we'll see what happens there too. And this is an important reason why we have the distinguished gentleman from Colorado who is here to talk about. Yes, sir, Doug, I'm going to have you come and join us right there. This is an important reason why we have an Infrastructure Investment and Incentive Act that we're going to do today. We're delighted that you're here. Obviously, Doug, we are suffering today because there's a big thunderstorm and storms throughout the Midwest and lots of planes in the South, and lots of planes are coming in late today. So we're going to go ahead and take testimony and move forward. But just so you know, without objection, anything you brought in writing will be in the record, or also some stenographers here and can complete the record with what you bring. Distinguished gentleman is now recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ranking Member McGovern and members of the committee. I appreciate you holding this hearing. My bipartisan legislation, H.R. 3281, aims to streamline the process for the transfer. Oh, that's better. My bipartisan legislation, H.R. 3281, aims to streamline the process for the transfer of some of the Bureau of Reclamation's projects to local beneficiaries who, in many cases, have or will repay the federal investment and who already operate and maintain these projects. Transferring these low-hanging fruit projects or parts of them will allow water districts to leverage non-federal financing through ownership equity and will decrease federal liability. Now, this is not a new idea. In fact, former Vice President Al Gore's Reinventing Government initiative proposed this concept back in the mid-1990s. Following that, Congress has passed a number of title transfers on a one-by-one basis, on a case-by-case basis over the last 2 decades, but at an alarmingly slow pace. During committee consideration of this bill, we heard that the current process is time-consuming, cumbersome, expensive, and uncertain. This has proven to be a disincentive to many water users who are now rightly asking for and deserving change. However, it wouldn't be fair to heap all of the blame on the agency. Congress has done its fair share in slowing down some of these simple title transfers. Under current practice, every single transfer, regardless of the size or scope, needs congressional authorization. I want to be clear to my colleagues that this legislation does not remove congressional oversight. In fact, this legislation includes a provision authored by the Subcommittee on Water, Power, and Oceans ranking member, Mr. Huffman of California, that allows for congressional review of any transfer authorized under this process. So at the end of the day, my bill provides an optional process that can be used to expedite simple title transfers. Any title transfer can still use the existing process if the participants prefer. Now, despite what some may suggest, this bill does not exempt any action from NEPA or any other environmental mandates. In fact, it's a condition under the bill that any recipient of the benefit of the bill in a title transfer has to continue complying with all applicable federal, state, and local laws and regulations. Since my bill was introduced, we have seen the administration and the Senate put similar proposals together to achieve the same goals as the legislation in front of you today. So the committee asked that you provide an appropriate rule for this bill and asked that the text of H.R. 3281, as reported by the Committee on Natural Resources, be made in order. And finally, I ask that you provide 1 hour of debate evenly divided between the majority and minority bill managers from the Committee on Natural Resources. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman, and I'm happy to entertain any questions or discussion.
Mr. Lamborn, thank you very much. Mr. Lamborn, there's a lot of discussion about what does this bill really do? And I'd like to, if I can, take just a second and cover what I am reading here about the essence about how important this is. And this has a lot to do with regulatory answers that regulatory bodies put forth, and they tell unlimited amount of people how to do their business and place rules and regulations. This legislation would clearly identify the problem that any regulation addresses and its significance. In other words, it would have to clearly state that as they put the rule out. It would determine whether an existing regulation should be modified to achieve the intended goal more effectively. In other words, it's got to address what the problem is. Why are they doing this? What would we expect to come from this? Number three, it would identify and assess alternatives to direct regulation, such as economic incentives. It's a business case that many times is lacking when these rules and regulations from these agencies come out, not even identifying what and why these regulations are being addressed. When a regulation is necessary, enact the legislation in the most cost-effective manner possible, considering total cost of compliance, innovation, incentives, and other factors. Many times, what happens is the rules simply come out with no consideration about what would be either the cost benefit or what would be the cost of compliance. Number five, conduct a cost-benefit analysis of contemplating regulations and only promulgating a regulation to the benefits if they outweigh the cost. Number six, base each regulatory decision on the best reasonable available data. In other words, don't make something up, but actually use what is present. These are the kinds of things that I think are common sense. I spent 16 years in the private sector, and every time we would try and go through a process to update, change ourselves, we actually had to justify it to ourselves. We actually had to understand what was in the best interest of why a change would take place. If government had to do this based upon a requirement that if you're going to write rules and regulations, you have to tell us a little bit more about it. I think this is exactly what Republicans, I think the public have been talking about for a long time, but as a former chairman of the board of a chamber in Dallas, I will tell you it's what we begged for, because the overwhelming question's always been, why are they making us do this? What is the cost, and what should we expect that the outcome would be? And under this scenario, your legislation, they would have to tell you up front, I don't think it costs any more money. I think it's common sense. I want to thank you for that. Dr. Burgess? Gentleman seeks no time. Six gentlemen from Massachusetts.
I'd reread my opening statement if I thought it would make a difference, but.
It's okay.
So when I think about the bill, so I will yield back.
Okay. Ms. Torres? No. Ms. Torres does not seek time. The gentleman from Alabama. Distinguished gentleman from the state of Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just quickly would like to thank Mr. Lamborn from Colorado for bringing this bill forward. I've got at least 2 districts in my congressional district that would benefit from a Congress allowing a transfer to them to facilitate that quicker. I think these projects have been in place for a long time. The Bureau of Reclamation is inundated, overwhelmed really by some of the needs, the improvements, the expansions that need to take place for a growing population in our country, and the increased needs of water users, and by allowing the local entities who have the ability and the desire and the need to provide for not only the maintenance operation, but for the expansion or the rebuilding of these projects. It just makes a lot of sense to give control to them versus keeping it under the wing of the Bureau of Reclamation. And as far as the assets are concerned, these local districts, water users have, for the most part, repaid the initial cost that was borne for them. And so by giving them more control, they're better able to control their own destiny instead of relying on the federal government. So I just want to thank the good gentleman.
Yeah, if the gentleman would yield.
Certainly.
This is a win-win situation. And as you know, in Washington State, as in Colorado, and in many, if not all states, water is such an important issue. And in our testimony over this bill, we heard from the Kennewick folks in Washington State. They very much...
In my district?
Yes, they very much want to see this happen. And it's a win-win situation in that the local water districts get to have title and actually control what they've paid for and are managing on a daily basis. But the federal government, by giving control to the local district, is relieved of the obligation and the liability if something bad happens. So the taxpayers won't be on the hook. So it's a win-win situation in however you look at it.
Yeah.
I yield back.
And it helps us, our local organizations, better meet the needs of the future. So again, thank you for bringing the bill forward. I look forward to supporting it on the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Is there further questions for the distinguished gentleman? Doug, thank you. I will tell you that the work on this, I think is taking place over a number of years, and I think this administration has been working with you to where they see this pretty much the same way about what it will do for our economy.
Well, exactly. And as I mentioned in my opening statement, under the Bill Clinton administration and Vice President Al Gore, they were in favor of this identical concept because it's common sense. Just as you recited to us some common sense regulatory principles, this is a common sense bill, and I think everyone comes out a winner.
Yeah, great. Okay. I want to thank the gentleman very much. Please remember, if you leave anything for us from stenographer and enable her to finish off the things that you brought together today, and I thank you very much. We're now going to move to the distinguished gentlewoman from North Carolina, and I'll have her feel free to come on up. And this is going to come directly out of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. And Mrs. Fox, welcome back to the committee. Virginia, how long do you sit up here?
8 years, I believe.
8 short years?
8 short years.
8 short years.
I believe that's right.
Well, let's put it this way. Some of the people in this committee were not aware. I don't know if you know Mrs. Torres or not, who's over to this side, but she is brand new to the committee. Obviously, you have a lot of friends up here and people who wished you well as you left for your chairmanship. We're delighted that you're here, and the distinguished gentleman's recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ranking Member McGovern, Ms. Torres, yes, you were here since I left. Members of the committee, thank you for holding this hearing on a rule for the consideration of H.R. 50, the Unfunded Mandates Information and Transparency Act of 2017. It's legislation to update the Unfunded Mandates Reform Act of 1995, or UMRA. We call this bill UMETA. We tried to come up with a really clever term, but could not do it. So we're stuck with UMETA. When UMRA was enacted, and by the way, I think it passed the House like 400 and some votes, and passed the Senate, I believe, 98 to nothing. Anyway, that UMRA passed overwhelmingly in 1996. Bill was introduced in 95, I believe, passed in 96. It was an important new step to identify and better analyze the potential burdens of federal legislative and regulatory mandates imposed on state, local, and tribal governments and the private sector. But 23 years later, UMRA has proven to be ineffective. Many burdensome federal mandates have slipped through the cracks due to loopholes and insufficient analyses. These unfunded federal mandates have imposed significant costs on state and local governments and the private sector. By closing the loopholes and improving the analytical requirements of UMRA, H.R. 50 will enhance transparency and accountability of proposed federal mandates. I am going to, in the spirit of my own concerns about just reading you my prepared statement, I'm going to skip over much of it and submit it for the record, Mr. Chairman. But it also codifies principles of regulation and cost-benefit analysis in Executive Order 12866, which was issued in 1993 by President Clinton. These principles have been reaffirmed by every subsequent president. H.R. 50 closes the loophole that currently allows an agency to forego UMRA analysis if the agency never issued a notice of proposed rulemaking. I think this will probably surprise you a little bit. According to GAO, 35% of major rules are issued without a notice of proposed rulemaking. Over 1/3 of rules imposed on other governments and the private sector do not go through the process set up to allow public input. And I don't know about you, but I hear more from my constituents about rules and regulations that they don't like than I do about laws that they don't like. Under UMRA, agencies are required to consult with state, local, and tribal governments while developing significant regulatory mandates. H.R. 50 extends this requirement to the private sector, which is similarly burdened by unfunded federal regulatory mandates. H.R. 50 also allows the chairman or ranking member of any congressional committee to request a retrospective analysis of an existing federal regulatory mandate. A committee chairman or ranking member may also request the Congressional Budget Office conduct an assessment comparing the authorized level of funding in legislation to the prospective costs to state, local, or tribal governments to carry out changes to a condition of federal assistance. H.R. 50 improves UMRA's measure of direct cost by ensuring foregone profits, costs passed on to consumers, and behavioral changes are included in economic analysis. Passage of UMITA is supported by every direct stakeholder of the UMRA process. This includes the Big Seven Coalition, which consists of the National Governors Association, the National Association of Counties, National League of Cities, the United States Conference of Mayors, the Council of State Governments, the National Conference of State Legislatures, and the International City and County Management Association. So essentially, representative state and local governments are unanimously supportive of H.R. 50, also supported by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the National Federation of Independent Businesses. We think that we should weigh this vast coalition of support against those who are in opposition. It's mostly just politicians in D.C. and activist groups that support unbridled regulation on behalf of the federal government. Congress should be listening to the job creators, the local government stewards, and the will of our respective states, not our own internal chorus of central planning here in D.C. Thankfully, last Congress, similar legislation passed the House with bipartisan support, and I am very thankful for the bipartisan group of co-sponsors on this bill and for the opportunity to bring it to the House floor again. We're also working with our colleagues across the aisle on amendments that we have brought forward in a bipartisan manner. So we've heard time and time again of the burdens the federal government imposes on others, and we believe that every unfunded mandate can affect every community, every congressional district, and we think that you, along with us, will want greater transparency and comprehensive analyses before allowing the federal government to establish mandates. That's exactly what H.R. 50 does. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this legislation, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Chairwoman Fox, thank you very much. Rob, I tried to look more like you. I told you when we left I was going to get a haircut just like you. How'd I do?
But you look 20 years young. 20 years young.
If I could only get Karen to agree with that, you'll have a chance later. See if you can talk her into that. Gentlemen, wish time?
No, Mr. Chairman, I have supported Chairwoman Fox in the past with this bill, and I look forward to supporting her again today.
Great.
I yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. McGovern.
Well, let me say, I want to say two things in praise of the gentlelady from North Carolina. One is I love it when she's in the chair during votes because we get out quicker. And two, I always appreciated her in the Rules Committee because she tried to condense the debate, and she tried to condense her debate, her opening statement. I appreciate that. So out of respect for her, I will have no questions, although I should say for the record, I knocked the hell out of you, Bill, in my opening statement, but I'll send you a copy. But
Thank you, Mr. McGovern.
I will yield back my time.
Did it lovingly. How's that? Dr. Burgess? Mr. Polis?
I want to welcome Dr. Fox back to the committee. I have the rare honor of serving on her other committee, so I continue to call her Madam Chair. I also want to welcome to our committee some guests, some young citizen advocates from Colorado, the Never Again Colorado group of college students and high schoolers, including Tay Anderson, Madison Rose, Olivia Gardner, Ian Gaskins, James McDermott, and Charlie Jones. And I wanted to welcome them to our Rules Committee here as they learn about our process, legal process and civics process up close and personal. So welcome.
We're delighted that you're here from Boulder.
We have a student at the University of Colorado at Boulder. Olivia Gardner is with us here from Boulder.
Good. Welcome. A little bit hotter here. We're delighted that, no, it's not. Okay, well. Okay, we're going to figure that one out at some point. Thank you very much. Delighted that you're here with us today. Is there anyone, Mr. Byrne? No? The distinguished gentleman from Washington.
Since you called me, I'd just say welcome to Chairman Fox. We appreciate having her back, and we miss her here on the committee.
She is.
Thank you very much.
She is. Ms. Torres? Does not seek time. Thank you very much. Virginia, when you walk in here, it causes a number of people to call you their favorite chairman. And I want to tell you that the years that I spent with you up here were a delight. I'm pleased that the gentlewoman was here, and it's good to see. How's Tom?
He's good, as irascible as ever.
Well, please give Tom our best, and thank you
will.
very much.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to introduce a young man who's with me today, too, John Higgins. He's from Surrey County, and he's shadowing me this week. This is his first day here, and he has the great experience of being here at the Rules Committee, and I thank you very much for your kind attention.
Well, once again, you did well enough to get invited back. We hope you'll come back, but we want to thank you for bringing this important bill to us today, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Could I just ask, did he bring his track shoes? Keeping up
told
with
him
you
to
is
wear
going to be an issue.
comfortable shoes, yes.
Yeah, he's going to learn somebody, and stay up late, too. She'll be around. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay, is there any other member that would seek to give testimony to H.R. 50?
Mr. Chairman, if I could just,
Gentleman,
since we're recognizing some of our interns here, I have an intern, Michael Raggi, who's from France, who's interning in my office. That's the southern part of my district. No, just, but we want to, he's having a great experience here, and we're lucky to have him, so I wanted to acknowledge him, but thank you.
Good. Well, I'm going to do the same, because we've got a bunch of bright young students here against the back wall. I won't get them in the order that they came in. We've got a couple from Texas Christian University, Southern Methodist University, University of Texas. So Josh Feldman from Dallas, Texas, a rising junior at Texas A&M, majoring in political science. Sam Mealy from Green Village, New Jersey, a rising junior at St. John's, majoring in government. He's been here before also. Kate McDonald from Little Rock, Arkansas, rising junior at Texas Christian University, majoring in business. Jackson Suarez from Dallas, Texas, rising junior at Texas A&M, that is as in Fighting Texas Aggie, majoring in political science. Mary Catherine Curlin from Chevy Chase, Maryland, a rising senior at Southern Methodist University, majoring in finance. Jade Bahara from Dallas, Texas, rising senior at University of Texas, majoring in political science, here for her 6th visit to the Rules Committee. She likes this, Jim. She enjoys the Rules Committee a lot. This is her favorite committee. Sebastian Wigley from Gainesville, Georgia, rising senior at the University of North Georgia, majoring in political science. And Elizabeth Roosevelt from Dallas, Texas, a rising junior at Hockaday High School. Her mother and father are dear friends of mine, and where is she? She is right there, and she has a little sister who's a Down syndrome person, and is a friend of my son, and they do Special Olympics together. So I'm delighted that Elizabeth is here with us today.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I have a question. Did you just mention the University of North Georgia?
As a matter of fact, I did from Gainesville, Georgia.
Well, it happens to be, that used to be North Georgia College in the Stone Ages when we wrote on tablets when I graduated from there. It is now the University of from Gainesville, Georgia, where, there he is. Ah,
The guy with the smile on his face. Yeah.
there is issues we need to discuss. The chairman will discuss it later. It's good to see you, though. It's good to have you. Great.
You know, having guys from Georgia here makes a huge difference.
Go Dogs, yeah, we're good. It is always still going to be the Saints, not the Nighthawks, but, you know, hey, we'll deal with that. Yeah. But I'll tell Cameron, it's good to see you.
Okay, so none of our witnesses, none of our students would wish to appear as witnesses today, so this closes the hearing portion for H.R. 3281, close the hearing portion for H.R. 50. Chairman, now be in receipt of a motion from the distinguished gentleman from Georgia also, and you're recognized for the purpose of a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant H.R. 50, the Unfunded Mandates Information Transparency Act of 2017, a structured rule. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the amendment recommended by the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, now printed in the bill, shall be considered as adopted, and the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill as amended. The rule makes in order only those further amendments printed in the Rules Committee report. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of question. The rule waives all points of order against the amendments printed in the report. The rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instructions. Section 2 of the rules provides for consideration of H.R. 3281, the Reclamation Title Transfer and Non-Federal Infrastructure Incentivization Act, under a closed rule. The rule provides 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Natural Resources. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the bill shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill. Finally, Mr. Chairman, the rule provides one motion to recommit.
Thank you very much. You've now heard the motion from the distinguished young gentleman from Georgia. I'll yield myself 1 minute to discuss the specifics of this motion. It's one rule, two bills, H.R. 50, structured rule, 1 hour debate, OGR, makes an order for amendments, 4 Democratic amendments, and motion recommit. H.R. 3218, closed rule, no germane amendments were offered, motion recommit. That would give us the basis of what we're doing in this rule. So is there amendment or discussion to that?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman,
Gentleman from
I have an
Massachusetts.
amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order and give the necessary waivers for the amendment to H.R. 50 by Representative Raskin, number 8, which expands the category of impacted parties beyond the private sector to include veterans, farmers, small businesses, law enforcement officers, and religious groups.
Okay, discussion? Vote now be on the Montgomery amendment. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no? No. Those have it.
As for a roll call, Mr.
Gentlemen,
Chairman.
this is a roll call vote. Clerk will poll the committee.
Mr. Cole, Mr. Woodall. Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Collins. Mr. Collins, no. Mr. Byrne. Mr. Byrne, no. Mr. Newhouse. Mr. Newhouse, no. Mr. Buck. Ms. Cheney. Mr. McGovern.
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings. Mr. Polis. Mr. Polis, aye. Mrs. Torres. Mrs. Torres, Aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman? No.
Clerk will report the total.
3 yeas, 6 nays.
The motion is not agreed to, the amendment is not agreed to. Further amendment or discussion? Seeing none, the vote will now be on the motion from the distinguished gentleman from Georgia. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
Ayes have it, ayes
Ask for
have it.
roll call?
Gentlemen, ask for roll call vote. Clerk will poll the committee.
Mr. Cole? Mr. Woodall? Aye. Mr. Woodall? Aye. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess? Aye. Mr. Collins? Mr. Collins? Aye. Mr. Byrne? Mr. Byrne? Aye. Mr. Newhouse? Mr. Newhouse? Aye. Mr. Buck? Ms. Cheney? Mr. McGovern?
No.
Mr. McGovern? No. Mr. Hastings? Mr. Polis? No. Mr. Polis? No. Mrs. Torres? Mrs. Torres? No. Mr. Chairman?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman? Aye.
Clerk will report the total.
6 yeas, 3 nays.
The motion is agreed to. Accordingly, the distinguished gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins, will be handling this for Republicans.
Mrs. Torres from California will
Ms.
be
Torres
handling
will
it
be
for the
handling this for
Democrats.
Democrats. Thank you very much. Normally at this time, a distinguished gentleman from Florida asks a question, and so the question is, will there be a further Rules Committee meeting this week? Today is Tuesday, so our next meeting is scheduled for tomorrow, Wednesday at 3 o'clock on H.R. 6237, the Intel Reauthorization Act of 2018 and 2019. So we will be getting deep into Intel tomorrow. Yes, sir.
Isn't there a Sarah fishery bill as well this week? The fish bill?
Yeah, the bill that we gave a rule to last week.
Oh, we already have that rule still in force?
Yes, it is still, we had met last,
Right, 2 weeks
week
ago.
ago and done
Yeah.
that.
Right, it's
And
still in
so
force. Okay, that's what I
it's
wanted to check on.
For H.R. 200, and I want to notify the minority that Mr. Byrne will be managing that rule for us.
Mr. Polis will be managing.
That's why I didn't want you to leave that one out.
Yes, you're exactly right. And if I'd learned how to read, I didn't go to Georgia, so I didn't learn as well, I guess. And Mr. Byrne will be handling that, Mr. Polis will be handling that for the Democrats, and that will be up tomorrow, as I understand it. Good. Is there further business for the committee? I want to thank the students that we have who are visiting us from Colorado and other students around the country, including North Carolina, and I want to thank you for taking time. The Rules Committee is a most interesting part of everybody's visit, but what we do is attempt to move things to the floor, so you'll get a chance then to see the debate that took place here as it moves forward to the floor in the next 2 days. I want to thank each of you for being here. This completes our work for the day.